I'm working for the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, in short, ICRISAT. My main responsibility, I work as a plant breeder, and I focus on breeding sorghum. I coordinate the sorghum improvement program in Africa, and I am based in Mali. So I would like to welcome you all. Today, we'll be talking about a very interesting topic. I think the discussion that we just had before this session about restoration of environments, natural resource management, especially in the wake of climate change, and focusing mainly in the dryland areas in Africa, where we have quite a lot of people, and not only people, also looking at people raising animals, livestock. So both, we find that climate change has got a huge impact in terms of food availability. And we are looking at what kind of solutions we can bring to look at that. So ICRISAT, where I work, we have 3 main programs that focus on one, looking at the improvement of the crops, especially breeding for climate resilience. And we also have a program looking at how do we make the systems more resilient and enabling the processes so that we have more resilient systems. And the other one, we also have the food and farm resilient systems, trying to bring all the 3 in integration to make sure that these systems work together, especially in the wake of the climate change, so that we can build a food and production system that is resilient. But then we now look at what are some of the things that we can do to really make this more operationalized. So I have 2 key presenters today. These presenters are very, very experienced, and they will be sharing with us some of the topics that will be interested to look at. So I will introduce the first presenter, Dr. Abdullah Al-Hendi. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Okay. So Dr. Al-Hendi is a soil scientist by profession, with quite vast experience over 30 years. He has been the Director General at the Ministry of Agriculture, now called the Ministry of Environment, Water and Agriculture. He is also currently working for FAO as a technical expert, but focusing on a project which is on development of rain-fed cereal production, which is ongoing and is under the Sustainable Rural Agricultural Development. And this is being coordinated or implemented under the Ministry of Environment, Water and Agriculture. His main interest and focus is on fertilization of the crops, especially under local irrigated agricultural systems in Saudi Arabia. And also, he is interested in monitoring and evaluation of land degradation of irrigated agriculture, so that we can come up with suitable recommendations for agricultural land restoration. So up to this, I would like to invite Dr. Al-Hendi to share us with his presentation. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. Before I start my presentation, I would like really just to shed some light about the farming in the desert. And to be very specific, I would really just indicate clearly what about the cultivation in Saudi Arabia. You see the total area of Saudi Arabia is 215 million hectares. At the moment, we could hardly cultivate 0.8 million. So it is very, very, very small area. And that is, I think everyone in this room can really figure out exactly the reason, and that is the scarcity of resources, especially the limiting factor, and that is water. So we have been cultivating what we call modern agriculture in Saudi Arabia since 1975. And since that time, certain really negative aspect of the cultivation come up in front of our eyes. And then we realize that the scale of degradation of cultivated land is building up. So before I do join, I have been working with FAO for the last 4 years. Before I do join FAO, I was involved in a project, and that is monitoring land degradation in irrigated agriculture in Saudi Arabia. How this, what I would like use the term productive perenniality, and the scale of degradation would really negatively affect the perenniality of all agricultural land. And if it is in the desert, is much worse really, because the spread of widespread of soil salinity is at alarming state at the moment. So we are trying really, it is a research work as well as a survey, and I think it's better really to start. Next slide, please. Yeah. Where? This one? And the green one. Okay. Investigating themes of degradation of local agriculture. These are the major content. Oh, sorry. This is the major content of this presentation. And it is a case study of land degradation in 2 major irrigated areas in Saudi Arabia. And then we will end up by the conclusion. The main themes that we have really thought about it, and we have identified during a short visit to most of the irrigated agriculture in the country, is as I put it, the soil salinity. And we thought that at the beginning, we have a fertility depletion as it is going on almost everywhere in the cultivated area throughout this planet. But we were surprised when we start our analysis, soil analysis, and I would like now just to shed some light about the 2 major agricultural in Saudi Arabia. And if you allow me, I want just really to indicate that this is the cultivated area in Saudi Arabia, starting from Wadi Dawasir in the south, going up to the Jordanian border over there. So this is Al Jawf, and these are the most productive agricultural region in the kingdom. And the studied regions were Wadi Dawasir, the yellow color, and the pink color of Hail. And these, if you just look to the figures here, they almost form 15% of the total cultivated area of this country, just over 150,000 hectares that cultivated in these 2 regions. And the main theme of the study, the main objective really, is to identify the degradation themes that affecting the productivity in these 2 major agricultural area. And then to come up with certain recommendation for the decision maker that we are in a stage of alarming state once it comes to perenniality of productive perenniality of field crops. We did whatever we could really to convince the decision maker that the situation is very delicate, very fragile, and more than that, the cultivation in the desert is very complex indeed. And what I mean by this, if you think about most of the desert all over this planet, you will find that the soil taxonomy indicate clearly that they are dominated by calcareous soils. And calcareous soils in general are bad soils, but if it is managed properly, it is a very productive. Well, I'm not going really to say very productive as volcanic soils, but very productive. In our case, in Hail, we are planting wheat using center pivot irrigation system. And in certain circles, we got more than 10 tons per hectare. So that just indicates clearly about the productivity of calcareous soil if they are in a way or another managed properly. Just to show you the scale of what we have done. This is based on the satellite images. All these spots in blue are the locations where we collect soil samples. And they are really with certain coordinate. They were just fixed on this satellite image. And if you can see 120 locations, 81 farms, and over there in Hail, 142 locations. We took from every single spot 5 different depths. And we start analyzing so many soil parameters just to see what's the reality of the situation. And I'm afraid it's not really encouraging. So I'll move to the next slide. And if you just focus on the electrical conductivity, and that is the measurement of soil salinity, you see just very briefly, just look to the non-saline soil. Here it is 12%, and over there it is 27%. And those highly saline soil, which are severely affected by the salinity, and their productive perenniality is diminishing day after day, if I may say. 30% are severely affected, and in the other regions, 17%. Moderately saline, which also meaning that you are building up salt in your soil profile, and the danger of losing such cultivated area is really going on in front of our eyes. So that is, this is needless really to say that we are cultivating alkaline soils, and that is because of the origin of these soils. We have, if anyone here is familiar with the soil taxonomy that was produced by the United States Department of Agriculture in the 70s, the order, suborder, the families, and then the great groups, and then family. We have only 2 orders, and that is aridosols and antisols. And I am afraid you could hardly only, there is no acidic soil in this country. There is, I may say, no neutral pH in this country. So it is alkaline starting from 7.2 and going up maybe in the saline sodic soils up to 8.4.6, something like that, especially if the sodium is highly concentrated in your soil. So I think this really convey the message. So I'll move. Yeah, that is the most important part of fertility. I'm not going really to jump to conclusion, I would like, if anyone familiar with soil science, sodium adsorption ratio and this SAR. And you see, luckily here, despite the sodium buildup, but because we have a huge amount of calcium and magnesium, so the SAR is not at the moment when we really did this research. At the time of the research is not really at alarming stage, meaning that SAR, it's been classified in the literature, and any scientist understand easily the effect of SAR on soil. And it has a terrible, if it is high, above 15%, it results in destroying soil profile and mainly structure. And the other negative aspect of having high SAR is what we call is the soil dispersion, meaning that in somehow just if you have even less than 10% of clay, this, because of the sodium, the presence of high SAR, this will really result in what we call soil dispersion and closing the pores, and we will end up by having water stagnation on the surface of your soil, on the surface of your cultivated land. And once again, I'm just trying to attach what I'm discussing now to the main title of this session, and that is productive perenniality. It is not only just what you come with the breeding, and if you don't really take care very seriously what is related, okay, you have every right to maximize your production, but don't degrade your land. And I'm afraid in this country, we are more or less acting in that direction. And I'm not going really to speak that much about whatever related to pure soil analysis. Maybe thousands of samples we have analyzed, and we came up with all that, whatever related to mineral nitrogen, available phosphorus. We have come to a conclusion that we are, because of the availability of cash for the farmers here, for the big farmers and even medium-sized farmers, we are over fertilizing. That is the conclusion. There is no fertility depletion in this country up to now, at least. But we are over fertilizing, and this thing, either if you lose your fertility or you over fertilize, you end up by the same conclusion. And that is a very serious thing. The interaction between elements will be severely affecting the productivity, the productive perenniality of your land. So I think I could really speak for 2 hours, 3 hours about this table, but I don't think this is the right time for that. So as I put it, the main conclusion that we are over-fertilizing, the main conclusion we are creating a terrible and negative interaction between elements, and especially major elements. You see, in certain, if you have the critical level that was in the literature, about 12 parts per million of available phosphorus, and you have 24, 25 in your own soil, you would realize, if you are experienced with the field and the symptom of these certain elements, you will realize that phosphorus, available phosphorus, the accumulation of available phosphorus is inducing the iron and zinc deficiency. So it is a very complicated and I'm afraid a fragile system unless you manage it very properly. And that is not the case, I'm afraid, in at least in this part of the world, because the number of qualified people who understand this complexity is not available, I'm afraid, especially once it comes to soil science. So I'll stop at that and then move to this one. And you could easily, because this is the main findings, apart from salt accumulation, everything related to the fertility and the presence of negative aspect of being in a state of over-fertilizing. And that is, as I put it, causing really somehow reasonable loss of your crop. So you are heading to maximize the production, but you are not really seriously calculating what you are adding, even the timing. And that is, at least when I did this survey by going so many travel missions, at that time, the vast majority of people, of farmers, if I may say, are really not in a position to understand the complexity of the interaction between elements. And also, much worse than that, the extinction agents are incapable really of realizing really the seriousness of the issue at this location. So I think you have figured out, yeah, 88 are saline really. We identify 88 as a saline land, let me put it like that, with severe salinity affecting 30%. This is in Wadi Dawasir and Hayel, 73. This is huge, huge figures. If anyone does care about the restoration of agricultural land, irrigated agricultural land, and see these figures, would come up really with the conclusion that the situation is very dire, and you are having lots of warning that telling you that you may destroy the whole system of producing crop in your land. By the way, if you allow me just to touch on that, you see this country is able at the moment, despite this 1 million, maybe less than 1 million hectare, 0.8 actually, 800,000 hectares are cultivated. These 800,000 hectares are at the moment securing about 30% of our food, our need. I don't believe for one single second about this terminology, what is called self-sufficiency, because this country would never, ever, ever be able to have a self-sufficiency because of the scarcity of the resources. But let me say this, it's very important really. Out of this 800,000, almost 10% are rain-fed cereals, rain-fed area in the country. And you might be surprised how this come, because we have the mountains in the southwestern part of the country. And in these mountains, there are really terraces, there are good piece of land, and the sustainability as a source of irrigation water is there. So 80%, 10% of all what we are cultivating at the moment, and the rest is irrigated agriculture. So I'll just move to my last slide, and that you see, we were really in serious discussion with the decision maker, unless they focus on the effective management of natural resources. They will regret the current situation, because these almost 1 million hectare could really reduce to half of that because of the seriousness of the situation, especially of salinity and the situation of unfavorable fertility at the moment. So that is one. Second thing, I think we are in this country committed a terrible mistake, and that is contributing to the degradation of agricultural land. You never establish an irrigation system if you are not in position to establish a drainage system with that. Otherwise, your water table will be built no matter what's the land form that you are cultivating. We are here mainly cultivating what we call paddy plain, not alluvial plain, because it is very little here, and the scale of irrigation water almost around the alluvial places is very little. So because of that, whatever you do, you are building up water table and ending up by salinization of your soil profile. This is about fertility, the last one here. But here, I would just really focus on that, identifying and combating degradation of agricultural land will definitely preserve the productivity of major cultivated, irrigated land in Saudi Arabia. And in turn, we come up to productive perenniality that we are, I am afraid at the moment, more or less missing that issue. Thank you very much. That's all. Or jump to the next speaker.
Yeah, I think we'll move to the next speaker so that at the end we can just wrap up with the discussion. Thank you very much. Yeah. All right. Yeah, so thanks very much for this interesting presentation. I would like also to welcome the next speaker. So the next speaker is Dr. Andre Van Rooyen. Dr. Andre is a principal scientist at the ICRISAT. Is also my colleague and actually my mentor, because when I just joined the ICRISAT, you know, people, they will give you all the tools, the technical things. Okay, here is your seat, here is your office. But Andre, when I went to his office, he doesn't know that he gave me the key. He showed me the way how to hunt in the system. So thank you very much for that. It was a discussion that opened my eyes. So anyway, Andre is specialized in innovative dryland crops, livestock systems. And his work bridges the gap between smallholder farmers and sustainable agricultural systems so that we can improve crop productivity, not only crop, but even livestock systems productivity. And also trying to make the systems more adaptable to climate change. So please welcome me to, join me to welcome Dr. Andre to the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Jumbo. I knew that the system was very difficult to navigate. So that first day when you reported for duty, as a system scientist, I decided that we need to help you. But yeah, thank you for that introduction. So I'm going to talk about something slightly different, but also using the same word on perennials. I'm going to talk about something that has been very upfront in my mind ever since I joined the CGIAR. I did my PhD in the Kalahari Desert, where for many years I looked at the interplay between annual grasses and perennial grasses. So when I joined the CG and I saw we only growing and breeding annual crops. Grain crops are primarily annual. And it is primarily a function, interestingly enough, and I'll try and be quick through this, but one of the reasons why humans are breeding annual crops is because when we started domesticating crops, human beings were transient over the landscape. So we had to take our crops wherever we moved across the landscape. And that caught us into this path dependency on growing our staples as annuals because we had to move them with us to the next place where we stayed. And unfortunately, in today's world, the seed companies are pushing back tremendously against us growing perennials because they want to sell the seed. But so before I carry on, let's just go through some basic principles. The photograph on the left is the root systems of perennial wheatgrass from Australia, which they are commercializing. And if you look at the scale here, this is about 3 meters. So imagine you have a crop that you do not have to plant. Its roots go down 3 meters from which it is collecting nutrients and water. In your irrigation schemes, that could have a significant implication on how we deal with fertilizer application, how we deal with salinization, how we deal with water tables. So what I'm trying to do here is to make a case for some significant investigations into the breeding of perennial crops. Now, when I talk to my colleagues like Jumbo and many others in the CG, they always tell me, but it's very difficult to breed for perennials. And I always tell them that if we started when I first started talking about this 20 years ago, we would have been 20 years ahead by now, but we have not started. But many other people have started. So there are numerous groups of researchers across the world that are looking and investigating in breeding perennial crops. In my country, South Africa, we can buy perennials fodder sorghum over the counter. It's there. We can buy perennial crops. Now, I also have one foot in the livestock industry where we make use of a lot of perennial crops. Alfalfa is probably one of the best known animal fodders, and it's a perennial, and it's a massively productive perennial. So there should be no real barriers for us not to seriously contemplating breeding perennials. And the examples that I will give a run through now relatively quickly is based on African dryland systems. So it's very different from what you spoke about, Dr. Eleni, but the concept I think still holds. So let's go through this quickly, and then we can discuss. Sorry, the last point I want to make is when we talk about plant breeding, we often talk about breeding of a individual crop. And we say, okay, we are maize breeders. Jumbo introduced himself as a sorghum breeder. My vision, and I'm an ecologist by training, is not just a perennial crop, but perennial cropping systems. And I will get to that because that's quite important. So just very quickly, I'm not going to take you through the complexities of this, but it does illustrate that when you're looking at annual crops, the annual plant growth cycle is very simple. And what you will see with simple things in life is if any one of these components are knocked out, that's the end of your crop. You start all over. Whereas when you look at the growth cycle of perennials, you have a reproductive cycle and a vegetative cycle. And yes, there are seed involved, but there's also vegetative growth involved and many other processes happening. So you can knock out any of these stages and your system will still remain. That's the big takeaway here, is that you're dealing with a system that is a lot less risky. And that is one of the big entry points that I look at when I talk about perennials. Sorry, I can give you the presentation. There's no point. So the other thing that I have seen in my 30 years in Africa is the cropping seasons start with a bout of rainfall. Farmers will then plow the fields, they will seed, and you can imagine how much rain you need in this whole process for these plants to grow. So there's a long lag time in the beginning of the season that is basically unproductive. However, just contemplate if you have a field with perennial plants that may have been grazed down by your goats or your cattle, but they still have a significant root system and they can act on the first rainfall. So you are extending your growth cycle by the same period of time that this plant, this annual cycle is growing. So we will end up with primarily longer term growth cycles. In other words, you can have plants growing more biomass for livestock, more biomass for carbon, and perhaps even more grains for food. However, the argument is often that there will be a yield penalty. Many people say that the perennial crops may not have as much, as higher yield as the annuals, the old ecological R&K selection. However, if you look at the rest of the positive contributions of perennial plants, it may just outweigh the yield penalty. The savings of poor people in far-flung areas in Africa, if they do not have to buy the seed, they do not have to now plow, they don't have to invest all the labor in establishing the crop, may be really important. The thing that the literature agree upon, however, is that we may have a much higher yield stability. So the yield may be lower, but it may be more stable because you're dealing with plants that has already got their roots 2-3 meters down the profile. So your risk of false starts when you plant. I'm also a farmer. I know what it feels like to plant, and then you get rain, and then you don't get follow-up rain, and then your crop dies, and then you have to buy the seed again. So all of those risks are really important. So one of the things that I'm suggesting is that maybe because we do not have all this very expensive inputs in the beginning in terms of buying seed and fertilizer and labor and plowing, we should not necessarily only look at the yield, but we should look at the profitability of the system. Us agriculturalists are so obsessed often with yield that we do not consider profitability. But for the farmer, it's about profits. Even if your yield is a bit lower, but your profits is higher, then maybe that is a viable option. Obviously, plants with root systems like this can fetch nutrients and water from much deeper down the profile. So when it rains and the column of water moves down through the profile, the perennial plant may be able to absorb that water from much deeper. And also your fertilizers. In the work that I'm doing on irrigation systems, we know that farmers, when they over-fertilize, you often end up with more fertilizer below the root zone than in the root zone. And if you have a longer root structure, you may be able to utilize those nutrients. So what I said about often in Africa, we see that you have zero yield in very dry years. So your perennial plants may not have as high a yield, but they may probably not be knocked out in the drier years like some of your annuals. However, there was, in my discussions with many people, we also said, okay, we want to talk about nature-based systems, and we also want to look at soil and soil health. If you have a monospecific stand of one crop where all the roots are exactly the same length, you have a very simple system. But we can intercrop our cereals with legumes. Strangely enough, the way the mental models work of us in agriculture, we are growing pigeon pea as an annual plant. It is actually a perennial, but we're treating it as an annual. because that's what the textbook tells us when we study agriculture, is that these things should be annuals, and we plow them out and plant them every year, even though they are perennials. So imagine we can have intercrop annual and perennial systems. You may be able to fix enough nitrogen, or at least a fair amount of nitrogen, to fertilize your cereal crops. However, the next question in my discussions with many clever people about this is, if we can predict drought using medium-term climate forecasts, we can also predict high rainfall times. We know in Southern Africa, La Nina is high rainfall. El Nino is low rainfall. So what prevents us from, when we know we're getting a high rainfall year, to interplant annuals within our perennials? Okay, so we manage risk with our perennials, and when the opportunity allow, we plant the annual seeds in between, because we know we're going to have high rainfall. So that may be a way to get past the perennial yield deficits compared to the annuals. So this is fictitious data, which is why I decided to make them hand drawings and not real graphs, else people may think it's real data. But let me tell you a very quick story. I bought a dairy farm from somebody that went bankrupt. He told me that these cows can produce 30 liters of milk a day. I fed them, and he told me what you need to feed them to get 30 liters of milk out of them a day. And I then realized that this is why the guy went bankrupt. So I adjusted the feed, I adjusted the yield down to 18 liters a day, but my profits are much higher. So he had a system where his cows produced 30 liters a day, but the cost of production was very high. Whereas mine are now down to 18, but my cost of production is very low. So my profits are higher, even though my yields are lower. Okay. And that's something that we often do not comprehend in agriculture. So maybe our annual systems, the cost of production is high, but in our perennial systems, the cost of production would probably be much lower. Even though the yield is lower, the profitability is higher. And then in my third scenario, where I say, okay, now let's plant some annual seeds amongst them, maybe we can push the yield even higher, and then still have a much higher profitability in this system than in that system. So this is the kind of thinking that I would love to propose, and say, let's think a little bit beyond the normal boundaries of Agriculture 101. We need, if we're serious about the CGIAR in the UNCCD, how can we contribute to helping poor farmers to increase their profits, help them augment their soils, help them increase the sustainability of their work, help them to save labor. So many people think that labor in Africa is free. It is probably one of the most limiting factors in Africa is labor. If we do not have to plant and plow every year, we will save farmers millions and millions of hours. Now imagine, just for one quick moment, if we can get, just to put it in global perspective, imagine if we can replace the annual maize that the Americans grow every year, just 25% of that into perennials, and we reduce the amount of diesel that America burns to plant their maize by 25%. It is a massive, massive contribution. But our obligation and our moral and ethics should say that this should be something that we should really look at, investigate it. It may not happen tomorrow. It may take a while, but to encourage you, the Australians are growing perennial wheatgrass commercially. It's there. In China, there are at least 30,000 farmers growing perennial rice. The perennial rice does not have a yield penalty. They get very similar yields, but their cost of production is dramatically lower. The depth of the roots is going deeper. The amount of organic carbon that they are storing in the soil is significantly higher. And I think we need to work on those sorts of principles, share that kind of data, and take this kind of concept much more seriously. And then my last slide is, thank you very much for people like Kageli that invited us to this, made it possible for us to be here. But also just a little hands up for Summit and the Land Institute. They will have a perennial conference next year in Mexico, where ICRISAT will work with Summit, will work with the Land Institute to try and get more and more people to take this concept seriously and to move forward with something that I think could most probably be one of the biggest game changers in agriculture if we take it seriously. So Jumbo, thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dr. Andre. So perhaps maybe you can take the front seat so that we can have a discussion. I see we have colleagues who they are working on a perennial rice. I think this will be a very interesting discussion. We also would like to learn from you, your experience, because you have already developed perennial rice and would like to hear more about the successes. But yeah, it's now open for the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Andrew, I have it's not a question, it's a discussion. Because we started with perennial rice and we wanted to commercialize it. We heard that in Australia, they did the we see like a pattern to get a profit from it. But you know, if we do the perennial crops internationally, especially in Africa, it's really hard for us to control them and to get that part of the fees back. I don't know if you get me. To do the international cooperation with Africa, especially Africa, it's good to cooperate with like Australia, America, European countries, but like other developing countries, we see it's hard for us to, if we got the pattern, but it's hard for us to get the pattern fee back. Pattern.
So my suggestion would be, I've had a number of discussions with Africa Rice, the CGIAR institute that studies rice. They are very interested. And I think if there are challenges, it's just challenges. If once we talk to the right people and set the right MOUs in place, I don't think that should be a problem. Our friend here is very high up in our system, and he could help a lot. If I knew you guys were here today, we would have said make a presentation and let's talk more about it. But I was not aware of it, so my apologies. But I think we need to really elevate the discussion to the next level, and then really find out what are the real problems, what are the barriers, and how can we address them? Because this issue is much bigger than some of other policy around patents. I am sure that we can address that. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Kagel.
Right.
Thank you very much. I am a farmer myself, a small-scale farmer. So I may not have the science knowledge you are talking about here, but I have two questions, one for the soil and the other one for the perennial. Now for the soil degradation, you have already shown in your presentation that some elements can be unavailable to the plants. For example, if I'm growing pumpkin, and we know pumpkin, the seeds have a lot of zinc. It's popularized that the farmers use pumpkin because the seeds have got a lot of zinc. Now, if the zinc is already locked in the soil, the plant cannot absorb. How do you, as scientists, test the pumpkins before you start popularizing them for use so that we don't just sell a fruit with no nutrients? So how do you do it? Now let me give him, for the perennial crops, I think that is a welcome idea, especially to the smallholder farmers, because of all the attributes you have highlighted. For example, like the pigeon pea, I grew up in a rural area where you are growing pigeon peas, and the pigeon peas used to be perennial, and even the sorghum, it used to be perennial. So we would harvest one time, and then it continues. It goes through the dry spell because we used to do dry rain-fed crops. So the pigeon peas would go through the dry period before the rains come back, and we would harvest. Similarly for the sorghum. But you scientists came and told us that you have better ones, are yielding, throw away these ones. So I think that is a very welcomed idea for the smallholder farmers. And I think when you start, I don't know whether it's already something that you are popularizing or is it still in your research. When you do it, come and do it together with the farmers so that the farmers can be able to select the best, maybe the ones that they used to hold those times a long time ago. So that's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For me, you seem to be much better than a scientist in your questions. So let me say this. All elements, you see, plants to really complete their life cycle, they need, in the literature at the moment, more than 20 elements. I'm not in the position now to classify them, but we have what we call macro and micro elements. You see that the most critical part of elements to be added to the media of the plant, let's say, and in this case is soil, is their availability and the ability of the plant to absorb them. So in this case, this dependent totally on the soil reaction. If you jump and disturb the soil reaction, and that is in a way or another, meaning the soil pH, how if certain small changes in the soil pH because of the introducing certain game changers to the soil reaction in your cultivation, this will really harmful the harmony between the root system and the ability of a plant to absorb whatever available for them in the soil profile. So these two crucial, the availability and the ability of the system. And that is, you can really go talking about for even weeks. This is very stated in the literature, but every single environment has its complexity once it comes to the availability of nutrients to be absorbed by a plant. So I hope that I'm not going to single out one specific crop that you have referred to, but this is general answer about the ability of a plant really to absorb available element for the plant.
Just on that, farmers, we are told to add fertilizer, chemical fertilizer into the soil. And then they will tell you like the fertilizer is uniform, yeah? Like you are told to use DAP is what? Diammonium phosphate. So you are told plant with this one, but they have not categorized diammonium phosphate with a lot of nitrogen in your soils or with less. because I was looking at your presentation. So why don't they make, or you as scientists, make fertilizers for different soils so that when we test, you don't apply like diammonium phosphate, all of us, we just use them.
Yeah, I agree with certain reservations, but this is agreeable, really. You've got really to know exactly the condition of your soils, meaning that in what way the soil reaction is acting for every single environment. And that is the critical part, is related to soil pH. The soil pH really is the most crucial part of the soil reaction that make the availability of whether it is in calcareous soil or even in acidic soil. So as I put it, if you intervene in disturbing the equation of the availability of nutrients, if you have them in your system. You see, in the desert here, if you look to the virgin soils, you will just find out that it is a very poor soil. The availability of phosphorus, the availability of a trace element that is iron, zinc, manganese, and copper, and the availability even no trace really of nitrogen, because nitrogen comes from organic source, and in desert conditions, the virgin soil, they don't have organic matter. So it is a very complex really system that unless you understand it very well and you handle it with research, I'm not saying, because what you ever apply in the desert farming like Saudi Arabia may not apply for subtropical or tropical, sorry, or temperate area. So you've got to do your research in your own environment and come up with the decisive. But I would like just to say this. I think one of the most critical part of the fertility is the timing and the quantity. And if you can handle this, and only research can do it, and it could be different from one crop to another. So maybe I will stop at that.
Thank you. One can talk for hours and hours about soil fertility and fertilizer. My team in Ethiopia works a lot on that. And the moment you start mixing fertilizers for specific soils, the costs go up tremendously, and the possibility of making a mistake increases tremendously. So the immediate experience is, and which brings me back to perennial crops. We need to look after the soil biology, not just the soil chemistry. If you get the soil biology right, then the fertilization becomes a lot easier. But we've become too reliant on chemistry for soil, and we need to, which is why we're at the COP, because we've destroyed so much soil in the world. We need to get back to functional soil biology. Your question about talking to farmers, I've been doing that for 30 years. It's one of the things that I really enjoy most is exploring with farmers what farmers need. As I've said, I'm also a farmer. So I understand the disconnect between science and the users of science. And we've spent a lot of time in different venues this last 2 weeks talking about the gap between science and the users of science. But yeah, we'll see you at CGIAR Science Week, and we'll continue this discussion.
So thanks very much. I want to go back to the question where you talked about the patent. Yeah, I think one of the important issue where Dr. Andre also emphasized was on the seed systems, that where can we make a saving with the perennial crops is the requirement of seed, that not every time will require seed. So I wanted to make a comment on the commercialization part in Africa. I think our systems in Africa, they are not as advanced as these other countries like, let's say, China or Australia, Europe, and USA, where the seed systems are really highly supported by the private sector. Yes, in Africa, most of the seed systems we're struggling with the informal type of seed systems. Now, when you have technology like this, which you want to commercialize, and because this is driven by the private sector, so that it's more sustainable. You get back the revenue to continue, sustaining the technology. So when you have informal type of seed system, it become very difficult. That's why probably you have very, very small adoption in terms of taking the technology. So one way how to look at it is try to explore partnerships with the private sector in Africa. And the main challenge in this case is if you have a crop that is a self-pollinated crop, the chance of recycling the seed is very high by the farmers. And this is the reason why most of the private seed companies in Africa, they don't invest much in the self-pollinated crops. They are more interested in crops like maize, which are open pollinated, and the recycling seed. If that is done, then it becomes the potential becomes less and less every time you are recycling. So that is the main challenge. But the partnership I'm talking about is that in that case now you go through the licensing process, so that you license it to another partner that they can use the technology, because they may understand the system much better. While they are deploying their own products, they may also show this product that you have, and the farmer can now learn more about it. And once the farmers have known about the technology, the benefits, then eventually the technology will now sell by itself. Yeah, but at the infant level, it needs a lot of promotion, and I think partnerships are very critical in that sense. So I wanted to put a comment on that. Yeah, please, sir.
Yeah, I just want also to take a bit of risk going to back to it. And thanks very much, Andrew, for showing the case. The way you present it, I do believe I wish we had more socioeconomist people in the room, because the cost-benefit ratio is nothing for people who understand systems. If you go with the perennial crops and you take maybe 5 to 10 years and do the assessment, you may probably even have better news or things to share in terms of the economic profitability and the benefits. We talk about payment for ecosystem services, we focus too much on the benefit cost ratio, or sorry, the value cost ratio, instead of thinking about the benefit cost ratio, where we harvest all the benefits we get from them. But going back to the point, yes, for the industry, if I go to perennial crops, I will be losing my money for all the time I spent. And we have been talking about payment for ecosystem services for soils and others. It's just really something that, as a kind of food for thought, as we try to talk to advocate and see, could be there any kind of equivalent of payment for ecosystem services for those who are developing perennial crops? The countries will get a bit of a kind of tax returns from the production, can the country put a small bit of that to support the researchers or industry sector working in the area of perennial crops? I think when you will have the conference in Mexico or somewhere next year, it's really something that someone needs to table something like a resolution and see how it can fly. We are saying it a lot as we talk about soils, as we talk about land for payment for ecosystem services. Majority of the people have said, especially when we think about the global south, that it will never happen to sustain the land, the soils, the way we want them, unless there is a kind of incentive that goes to the farmers, and the payment for ecosystem services will be really great. Just to contribute to that discussion. Now to both of you, I did really like the marriage between the two presentations, the perennial crops and the soil. I'm a soil scientist by training, so I was enjoying listening to you. And in fact, it's really amazing what you see, and I don't know what to do, but advising countries in terms of trying not to resist, but to listen to the scientific community before they got overwhelmed by the fertilizer industry. There is a lot of lobbying happening. It's not here only Saudi Arabia. For someone working in Africa, sometimes I feel sorry to the farmers, even to the countries. Sometimes they don't have mechanism to be able to resist that kind of lobbying for fertilizers. And that's why you end up with a lot of farmers saying, using fertilizer without knowing why you are using that fertilizer. You use it because the country is pushing, is subsidized, say, and they promise that you are increased yield. At the end of the day, you just see that if you do comparative analysis, you see that the difference has not even been significant in terms of your income, because you're solving a problem that you don't know. Until we do the analysis and understand what kind of nutrient we want to put, just going back to the equation, normally in systems which are well organized, the fertilizers are not mixed ahead of time. There is what we call customer blend fertilizers. You get all the type of fertilizers, you do your soil analysis, and then you do the combination. Then you can just say, you can remove nitrogen, sometimes you can remove phosphorus. That's our countries that have been able to build the systems, and they know what they want. But others are countries like markets, you just make sure you are able to generate revenue, whether they get returns or not, that is a problem. But now being serious, I just want to ask you a question to the two of you. How do we make sure that those who are breeding for perennial crops are talking to soil scientists to make sure that you develop varieties that can help us to cope with the different systems we have? That could be in terms of the soil quality, that could be also in terms of drought tolerance. And so what kind of dialogue or platform do you think, if we have it, you can tell me? If we don't have it, how can we go about it? Thanks.
Gagali, let me answer you with a bit of humor first. It's a lot easier to talk to farmers than it is to talk to soil scientists. It can be very challenging. But yes, I'm old and gray, but I have been canvassing for much more integrated research and development within the CGIAR. If we cannot, even in our own institute, we struggle to get the breeders to talk to the social scientists, to talk to the biophysical people, it is really difficult. But the reason I tried to frame my proposition in that specific way was really to say, and the next iteration, I will refer much more directly to multifunctional landscapes, because we need to marry multifunctional cropping systems with multifunctional landscapes. Gone are the days that we're just growing crop for food. I want to say that again. we cannot afford to just grow crops for food. If we do not have those multifunctional impacts of crops, carbon, the ecosystem services, the impact on labor, the impact on soil. So yes, how do we do it? I'm not entirely sure, but let's use words like multi-stakeholder platform and co-design. We've heard all of those words when we talk to farmers and other stakeholders. But co-design, I think, in the CG amongst us is going to become one of those salient features that we really, really need to take seriously. Because we don't do that. We sit in these forums, we talk to one another, and then we go back and we do exactly what we did the day before. And again, we do not have the luxury of the amounts of money we had in the past. Time is running out when we look at desertification, the loss in biodiversity, water, et cetera, et cetera. So we are going to be forced to work together. And that's why I'm really happy that you're here, because I think from your office, stimulating these discussions across centers is critical. So yeah, I will talk to Sam. We have to take you with to Mexico when we talk about it there.
Okay, thank you. This is really a very good elaboration. And I agree about what Dr. Andre just said. But let me, as a soil scientist, go back to the issue of fertility. You see, I think we are, as a scientific community, are not doing enough effort really to communicate with the farmers and to introduce the fruitful outcome of science, especially once it comes to fertility. You see, one of the most, I'm not going to say advanced nation, but one of the most nation that have so many institutes is India. And I have an idea in what way they are adding their urea. Let me put it like this. And I'm afraid, I thought that they are handling things in a way that is when the Green Revolution was introduced in the 60s. Their way of adding urea directly to the surface of the soil in calcareous soils, you are just telling everyone that 30 to 40% of your nitrogen is evaporated. So this indicates clearly that unless the scientific community try to find a mechanism that to convince the farmers and to educate them about the issue of fertility, the exact timing of, this is what I do believe from my experience, the exact time of addition, how much you add at a very specific growth stage, maybe part of a growth stage. Unless we come up with this decisive application of major elements and the trace element as well, I don't think that we are in a position really to contribute that much. Yeah, we can publish, we can really be proud and bragging also about whatever we do as a scientific community, but unless the application, the implementation goes to the end user, it's something really, I'm not going to use the word useless, but somehow close to that. If you don't mind, I have a question to the doctor here. You see, I really, although it is very brief and very really intensive information that you have just presented, and I'm now just imagining the reduction in the cost if you are heading to perenniality, to perennial crops. My worry is about something. You have no seed, and this is a saving cost. You almost zero tillage, as I understand, and that is how it may go. So in what way would you handle the issue, which is very critical, of weeding? Weeding. Yeah, this is in perennial cultivation is a real headache unless we come up. But please don't tell me that you can use chemical, pesticide, herbicides, and so on. So I would be very much really interested in hearing you.
Yeah, that is a perennial question, but let me give you one of the answers. One of the reasons we have to keep using chemicals for weeds is, and I'm not sure why agriculturalists don't learn this, but ecologists learn this. Weeds, the role of weeds is to heal soil. If you look at succession, weeds are there to change the soil chemistry for the next generation of plants as you go along the successional gradient. When we stop messing with soil, this weed seeds below the surface are not exposed through cultivation. So they remain under the surface, dormant. The reason why we often have a lot of weeds is because we keep tilling. So we bring all the seeds up from the bottom, then we kill them, then next year we till again, we bring the seeds up. I studied seed banks in the Kalahari Desert. You can have 15% of your soil weight in seed in dry systems. So to get rid of those seeds by plowing every year, you're never going to get rid of them. If you work with seeds, and on my farm I've done that, it's taken 6 years. I've got almost no weed because I have perennial plants and I do not disturb the soil. And I have a lot of animal manure and urine in that soil. So the perennial minimum tillage, I plant with a no-till planter. So if you stop disturbing the soil, you will never get rid of the weeds 100%. My son walks around with a slasher. When a weed comes up here and there, it takes it out. But the weed load, I would say, in the last 6 years has gone down by probably 90%. Because the soil, we're back at the level of soil health. Okay, so that's the one way that I see that we have gone wrong in the past, is that we keep cultivating soil is preparing the soil for the next weed generation, and then we want to plant our crops in there. And if you no-till is probably one of the best things you can do to maintain weed under control. We don't use any chemicals on our farm, but it's taken a long time. But no-till and good soil health, because there's a lot of people now, if you look in the agroecology literature coming out now, that people say that most early successional plants, weeds, cannot grow in healthy soil. They are outcompeted by the perennial plants. It's really fascinating stuff, but that's what I see. Yeah. I want to ask a question to our colleagues from China with the rice. I've been burning to talk to you guys for many years. Just one question, and we can take the discussion offline outside, but how do you see the future of perennial rice in your country? Is it something that's going to explode? Is it going to become a significant part of rice production or not?
Yeah, actually, that's a real question. I'm gonna ask you. So, I'm gonna tell something about the tech side. So I'm Tony from BGI Research. So I identified the QTL for this perennial trait. So we just use a small segregating population and to get this QTL. So in a long run, we can make any rice cultivar perennial. So yeah, like you just asked, so we found this in China, And most rice patio, they grow this annual rice. And we found that most farmers, they are okay with that. And all the management, they are fit for this annual crop. That means probably only for like some hills, they can use perennial rice to keep this like a slope cover and get some like a reward. And we found that this perennial rice, and I think my colleague can answer that better because she's a chief representative in Africa. And actually, I'm gonna follow your questions with my question. So I would say in the future, after enough R&D, we can identify the genes or the locus for this perennial like a trait for each one of those crops, major crops, maize, sorghum, and also other crops like a legume. And because they all have this close relative, perennial relatives, so just take some time. And if we have the techniques, but all the annual crops, people being like grow them for like thousands of years, must be, I mean, besides this big companies, there must be a lot of things we need to think, like how to manage the field, like how to control the pests and disease, because we last using the same crop for a long time, there must be some disease built on, especially like a soil-borne disease. That takes some efforts to do the research and do the breeding. But even with those uh done, and so my question is, do you think for the perennial crops, and which crop will be most important for like a research in the next few years, which will bring us the most like a sustainable like a edge and profit for the farmers? So that's my questions, like a which crop, major crop or some legume, we should put all the like research and the development efforts on. Yeah, that's my curious. So, yeah, ask you like just wondering. I'm not a farmer, but I want to hear from a real like a breeder. Yeah.
What crop do you think is going to be successful as a perennial crop in the coming few years?
Okay. Uh, when I answer you, the answer lies far in the future. I think it's going to take us a long time to get to perennial crops. We will have to look at the evolutionary history of these crops, which has got still good wild relatives that are perennial. I think one of the answers will lie in not just how we grow perennial crops. If we want to manage weeds, we will have to get multi-species crops. I've done some interesting work on the web. There are very interesting harvesters being developed in the world that you can harvest 3, 4, 5 crops with the same harvester that would separate the seed for you. So I think in complex systems science, we talk about the coevolution of the components of a complex system. So as we breed the crops, the varieties, I think it will have to be some cereals with some legumes. We will also therefore have to develop the mechanization on how you harvest multi-species fields. And I think that will be the critical. So to answer your question, we will have to talk to the farmers, the soil scientists, the mechanization experts, the evolutionists, the anthropologists, to begin to design. And that's why I'm resisting in the idea of designing a perennial crop, because we're just creating a similar problem. We need to go to perennial ecologies that we can also integrate into the first world. And the reason why there is now people like John Deere and other mechanization companies are beginning to build harvesters to harvest multiple crops is because we are realizing that when you grow mixes of crops, you are far more effective. You can make use of different trophic levels above and below ground with different root structures, etc., etc. So all I'm saying now is the next step would be is to turn these multi-species crops into multi-species perennial crops. Now remember, my first statement was that I'm not an agriculturalist, I'm an ecologist. We don't have a wheat problem in the Serengeti. We don't have a wheat problem in the Kruger National Park. If you look at these natural systems based on perennial grasses, which are perennial cereals, there's no weeds in there. There are weeds in there where elephants has died and it disturbed the soil ecology, or you make a road and then you disturb the soil. There are weeds in disturbed soil. There are very few weeds in climax grass fields. You can go and look in go to Kruger or Serengeti, you will see there's no weeds in natural systems. It's a fancy concept, but we often don't think about it because we split our careers between ecologists and agriculturalists, and then we don't talk to one another. But healthy soil do not harbor weeds. And this is why I'm so passionate about this, is that I think we can solve so many problems with mixed species perennial cropping systems. One more question there.
Thank you for your, I have one question to, I think you're all scientists up in this room, but listening to you talking, engaging with each other, I'm like scared as a farmer, because I thought there is a platform where you all sit and talk and agree. And then you also bring in the policy, the regulators. You talk and agree, so that by the time you are giving us a product, you are all in agreement. Otherwise, it looks like each of you work in isolation, then you bring the product to us, the farmers, and you walk away, clapping to yourself, you have done a good job, but you leave the farmer struggling. So I'm challenging you, can you people be working together? Maybe including the regulations. I've heard somebody talking of patenting here. You like now when you're coming up with a program, sit before you introduce it to us as the farmers. Maybe you talk to each other, you have a small platform, discuss about the soil, discuss about the yields, all those things, the roots, those ones we are talking about, discuss about the regulations, yeah, so that you don't produce something very good, walk away, you are very happy, but you leave the farmer now struggling with the regulations, the market system and all that, and we remain like where you are. The other day I said, we look up to you as our doctors, but a doctor gives medicine, you can treat somebody, the problem goes. You can give somebody medicine, you complicate the issue. Or you can treat somebody and the somebody remains the same. So for you to be able to help us, you must talk among yourself as scientists and give us something, a complete, a finished product. Thank you.
Because I have something, another session. I think this is a very fascinating statement, but let me add something to that. I think the tragedy with scientific community and the farmers, that there is a very critical something in between, and that is the private sector, who are producing all these and commercializing them, everything. So if you come up with a solution really to eliminate the ability of the private sector, which produce, you see, in the 70s, they play with a game of water absorbent material, and they were all false. There is nothing in that, but they made until the farmers and the scientific community find out that this is harmful in terms of economy for the farmers and the scientific community as well. So if we more or less start to with the issue that you have indicated, and that is the policies of all agricultural ministry, all agricultural institute to come on board and to have certain mechanism that really this part of the game, if I may say, this part of the system is disappearing. This could really help all of us. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks very much. This was a very, very interesting discussion. And I think we can continue discussing, offline. And I think, one of the objectives for having, meetings like this is to interact and share ideas, know each other, create some network so that we can now continue discussing. So hopefully we'll continue discussing even beyond this. So at this point, let me thank our presenters for sharing with us your experiences and the very interesting discussion. Thank you very much.